When disrespect finds its way to you, it often arrives loud, uninvited, and convinced of its own importance. It tries to provoke your voice, your anger, your reaction, because it feeds on anything that proves it was worth your attention. But there is a deeper kind of strength, one that does not rise to meet noise with noise, but instead lets silence stand like a wall that cannot be broken. There is power in not answering what does not deserve your breath. In that quiet space, you are not losing. You are observing. You are watching how people reveal themselves when they think they have disturbed your peace. And often, what they reveal is far more damaging to them than anything you could have said in return. Not every wound requires your hands. Not every insult requires your voice. Some things are meant to be left untouched, so they can collapse under their own weight. Because what is thrown at you in disrespect is not a reflection of your value, but a mirror of someone else's disorder. And in that silence, something else begins to move: time, truth, consequence. You do not need to chase justice when life itself is already carrying it forward. Silence is not absence, and it is never emptiness. It is a deliberate act of control, a decision to hold power inwards rather than spill it outward in reaction. When a person is disrespected, the most instinctive response is to answer back, to correct, to defend, to restore balance through words. Yet that instinct often comes from urgency rather than wisdom. Silence interrupts that urgency. It creates space where emotion cannot immediately dictate action. And in that space, something stronger begins to form: clarity. Controlled power is not loud. It does not announce itself in anger or justify itself through noise. Instead, it rests in restraint. When someone chooses silence in the face of disrespect, they are not surrendering their position. They are refusing to be pulled into a lower version of themselves. The insult may be thrown with force, but silence refuses to give it the satisfaction of landing with equal force. In that refusal, power shifts. The situation no longer belongs to the one who provoked, but to the one who did not react. Silence also changes perception. When words are not offered in return, the original act of disrespect begins to stand on its own. It is no longer buried under argument or diluted by emotional exchange. It becomes visible in its raw form. People often expect retaliation because it validates their action. When that validation does not come, the imbalance becomes clear. The aggressor is left with their own noise, while the one who remains silent holds a kind of stillness that cannot be easily interpreted or controlled. This form of restraint is not passive. It requires strength to feel the sting of disrespect and not convert it into immediate response. It requires discipline to let the mind settle while the emotions attempt to rise. In that discipline, dignity is preserved, not because the insult was erased, but because it was not allowed to dictate behavior. Every unspoken word becomes a boundary, and every pause becomes a declaration that peace is more valuable than reaction. Over time, this practice builds an inner foundation that is difficult to shake. The more a person learns to remain silent when provoked, the less power provocation holds over them. Situations that once demanded immediate defense begin to lose their grip. The mind learns that not everything deserves a response, and not every challenge requires engagement. In that learning, strength becomes less about confrontation and more about control of self. Silence, then, is not what is left when words fail. It is what is chosen when wisdom takes precedence over impulse, shaping a presence that cannot be easily disturbed or defined by the actions of others. Disrespect often feels personal in the moment, as if it is aimed directly at the core of who you are. But in truth, it says far more about the person who gives it than the person who receives it. When someone chooses to insult, belittle, or undermine another, they are not revealing the truth of the other person's worth. They are revealing the condition of their own mind, their own insecurities, and their own lack of balance. This shift in understanding changes everything about how disrespect is perceived and handled. A person who is grounded in self-respect does not need to tear others down to feel elevated. When that balance is missing, words become weapons used to create a false sense of superiority. Disrespect, in this sense, is not a measurement of truth, but a reflection of inner disorder. It is often born from comparison, envy, frustration, or unresolved pain. Instead of confronting those inner struggles, a person may project them outward, choosing another individual as the target for what they cannot manage within themselves. When you recognize this pattern, the emotional weight of disrespect begins to shift. What once felt like a personal attack becomes something else entirely, a glimpse into someone else's instability. This does not mean the behavior is acceptable or harmless, but it removes the illusion that it defines your value. Your worth is no longer tied to the opinion of someone who is not operating from a place of clarity. That separation is essential because it prevents external chaos from becoming internal confusion. Understanding this also builds emotional distance without physical removal. You can remain present in a situation without absorbing its negativity. You can hear words without accepting them as truth. This ability to filter experience through awareness rather than reaction is what preserves inner stability. Instead of asking, "Why are they saying this about me?" the deeper question becomes, what is happening within them that requires them to say this at all? People rarely speak from a vacuum. Their language carries the weight of their experiences, their frustrations, and their limitations. A person who is at peace does not easily produce chaos in others. In contrast, someone carrying unresolved tension often releases it wherever they can find a surface. When you become that surface, it is not because you are the cause, but because you are simply within reach. This understanding does not require you to excuse harmful behavior or tolerate ongoing disrespect. It simply prevents you from internalizing it. It creates a boundary between your identity and someone else's expression. Without that boundary, every insult becomes a question about your worth. With it, every insult becomes evidence of someone else's struggle. Over time, this perspective strengthens emotional resilience. You begin to see that not every voice deserves authority over your self-image. Not every opinion is rooted in truth, and not every attack is a reflection of reality. Some are just echoes of inner conflict, projected outward in search of relief. When disrespect is met with immediate reaction, something subtle but important is often lost. Control over the direction of the moment. The first impulse after being insulted or undermined is to respond quickly, to defend reputation, to restore balance through words that match the force of the attack. Yet this speed, though emotionally satisfying in the moment, often feeds the very chaos it is trying to correct. It turns a single act of disrespect into a cycle where energy is exchanged rather than resolved, and dignity becomes entangled in argument. Immediate response rarely comes from clarity. It usually comes from emotion rising faster than thought. In that state, words are chosen not for their wisdom, but for their impact. An impact, when driven by anger, often expands the situation rather than containing it. What begins as a moment of disrespect can quickly become a larger conflict, shaped by escalation rather than understanding. The more energy is given, the more the situation grows, until the original issue is no longer visible under layers of reaction. Retraint interrupts this pattern. When there is no immediate response, the emotional fire is not given oxygen. The silence that follows does not erase what happened, but it prevents it from multiplying. In that pause, something important happens internally. The mind begins to separate feeling from fact. It starts to evaluate rather than react. This shift allows dignity to remain intact, because dignity is not built in the moment of defense, but in the decision not to descend into unnecessary conflict. There is also a deeper cost to reacting immediately. It often places control in the hands of the other person. Whoever provokes first can, in many cases, determine the emotional direction of the exchange. If they succeed in triggering an instant response, they have already influenced the outcome. But when there is no immediate reaction, that control is disrupted. The situation no longer moves at their pace. Instead, it slows down, loses momentum, and becomes uncertain for the one who initiated it. Choosing not to respond right away does not mean ignoring reality. It means refusing to let reality be shaped by impulse. It creates space where perspective can return. In that space, the need to prove something weakens, and the understanding of what truly matters becomes clearer. Not every insult requires correction. Not every provocation deserves engagement. Some moments lose power when they are not fed. Over time, practicing restraint in the face of disrespect builds a different kind of strength. It trains the mind to pause before speaking, to observe before reacting, to consider whether a response will bring resolution or simply extend conflict. This kind of discipline is not passive. It is active control over emotional direction. It protects energy, preserves clarity, and maintains dignity in situations designed to disrupt all three. In this way, silence becomes not just a response, but a strategy that shifts the balance of power away from reaction and toward awareness. Karma operates in a way that does not require noise, announcement, or human permission. It is not something that needs to be enforced through confrontation or accelerated through emotional reaction. Instead, it unfolds quietly, often in ways that are only understood with time. When someone experiences disrespect, the natural urge is to seek immediate correction, to balance the moment through direct response. Yet there is another force already present in the background, one that does not depend on personal intervention. Karma moves through patterns, consequences, and outcomes that gradually reveal the full shape of an action. What is important to understand is that silence does not mean absence of justice. It simply means justice is not always visible in the moment it begins. When disrespect occurs, it may appear as though nothing happens afterward. The person who acted without care may continue their life without immediate consequence, and this can create frustration in the one who was hurt. But karma is not measured in immediacy. It is measured in unfolding. What is planted in one moment often grows in another, shaped by circumstances that extend beyond direct observation. When a person chooses not to retaliate, they are not preventing justice. They are stepping out of its way. They are allowing consequences to develop without interference. Emotional reaction often tries to accelerate outcomes, to force balance quickly, but in doing so, it can distort clarity. Silence, however, preserves the natural progression of events. It does not add distortion through anger or confusion. It allows reality to speak in its own time. There is also a psychological dimension to this process. People who act from disrespect often repeat patterns. If those patterns are not corrected internally, they eventually surface in other situations. Over time, the same behavior that was directed at one person may be directed at another, or may return in a different form. This repetition becomes part of the consequence itself. It is not always dramatic or immediate, but it is consistent. What is unbalanced does not remain isolated. It tends to circulate until it meets resistance or reflection. Silence in the face of disrespect also removes emotional fuel from the situation. Without reaction, there is nothing for the disrespect to feed on in that moment. This absence of reinforcement often leaves the action standing on its own, unsupported. In many cases, what is unsupported begins to reveal its own instability over time. Words or actions that once seemed powerful may lose their weight when they are not met with engagement. The absence of response becomes a form of exposure. Karma, in this sense, is not external punishment delivered by force. It is internal correction shaped by time, consequence, and repetition. It is the way actions eventually encounter their own reflection in different circumstances. When silence is chosen, it aligns with this natural unfolding rather than interrupting it. It allows events to develop without distortion, without escalation, and without interference that might cloud the final outcome. There is a quiet certainty in this understanding, a recognition that not every imbalance needs immediate correction from the self, because there are processes already in motion that extend beyond individual control, shaping outcomes through experiences, decisions, and repeated patterns that eventually converge in ways that reveal what was once hidden, sometimes in forms that are subtle, sometimes in ways that are unmistakable, and sometimes in ways that arrive long after the original moment has passed. Walking away in calmness is often misunderstood as avoidance or weakness, when in reality it is one of the highest expressions of control over the self. In moments of disrespect, there is a powerful temptation to stay, to argue, to correct, to ensure that one's voice is heard and one's dignity is defended in real time. Yet there are situations where staying only deepens the disturbance, where engagement turns a small spark into a consuming fire. Choosing to leave in calmness is not about escaping the situation. It is about refusing to be consumed by it. Calm departure carries a quiet authority. It communicates that presence is not available for chaos, that attention is not freely given to disorder, and that peace is not negotiable. Unlike reaction, which binds you to the moment and the person who created it, walking away restores independence. It breaks the emotional connection that disrespect tries to establish. When someone insults or provokes, they often seek a response that anchors you to their level of energy. By leaving calmly, you deny that anchor completely. There is also a deep preservation of dignity in walking away. When emotions are high, words can easily become heavier than intended. They can escalate a situation beyond repair, leaving behind regret that lingers longer than the original insult. Calm withdrawal prevents that damage. It protects the integrity of your voice by ensuring it is not used in a space where it would be devalued. Silence paired with departure often speaks more clearly than any argument ever could. Walking away also shifts the center of power. In confrontation, attention is locked on the exchange, and whoever reacts most strongly often loses control of the narrative. But when you choose to leave without agitation, you remove the audience from the conflict. You take away the stage on which disrespect is performing. Without that stage, the energy of the moment begins to collapse. What was meant to provoke a reaction loses its purpose when there is no one left to react. Calmness in departure is not emptiness. It is disciplined. It requires strength to feel the pull of anger or the desire to respond and still choose distance instead. That choice is not made out of fear, but out of awareness that not every battle deserves participation. Some conflicts exist only to drain energy, not to resolve truth. Recognizing this allows a person to preserve their emotional resources for places and moments where they actually matter. Over time, this practice builds a reputation that does not rely on explanation. People begin to understand that disrespect does not receive engagement, and that chaos does not receive attention. This silent boundary becomes stronger than any verbal warning because it is consistently enforced through action rather than argument. The more it is practiced, the less often it needs to be used. In this way, walking away in calmness becomes more than a reaction to disrespect. It becomes a way of living with clarity, where peace is actively chosen over participation in disorder, that seeks validation through engagement and emotional reaction